I wouldn't blame anybody for talking about demonology here.
Nella seconda parte dell'episodio con Jacques Valleè troveremo un accenno alla fisica dell'informazione, un nuovo trend da alcuni anni ormai. Ma oggi non ci facciamo mancare neppure la demonologia, i Jinn e Colares. Lue Elizondo ne ha accennato più volte e Jacques Valleè oggi farà riferimento ai Jinn dando per scontato che sappiate chi sono. I Jinn sono creature soprannaturali della tradizione islamica e pre-islamica araba, profondamente radicate nella cultura del Medio Oriente, nel Nord Africa e dell'Asia meridionale. Sono menzionati più volte nel Corano e nei racconti popolari come le 1001 notte. Poiché non siamo musulmani qua in Intermundia e non conosciamo nessun musulmano, per spiegarvi chi sono i Jinn dobbiamo purtroppo chiedere all'intelligenza artificiale. La descrizione dei Jinn creata dall'IA corrisponde molto bene a quello che abbiamo sentito in questi anni sul canale sulle intelligenze non umane. Così tanto che ci viene da pensare che la tradizione musulmana sia più precisa di quella cattolica sull'argomento, che divide solo in angeli e demoni, ma comunque per alcuni punti coincidente. La parola Jinn deriva dalla radice araba JNN, che significa nascondere o essere invisibile. I Jinn infatti sono esseri invisibili agli occhi umani, per natura. Secondo il Corano i Jinn furono creati dal fuoco senza fumo, Nar Samum, prima della creazione dell'uomo, che invece fu creato dalla creta. Ecco un versetto emblematico. E invero creammo l'uomo dall'argilla secca, tratta da fango nero plasmato, e prima di lui creammo i Jinn dal fuoco ardente. Nel contesto islamico, i Jinn hanno libero arbitrio come gli esseri umani. Possono essere musulmani o miscredenti, giusti o malvagi. Saranno giudicati da Dio nel giorno del giudizio come gli uomini. E uno dei Jinn più noti è Iblis, che si rifiutò di inchinarsi ad Adamo e divenne Satana, Shaitan, anche se alcuni lo considerano un angelo decaduto, un dibattito aperto nella teologia islamica. Come potete sentire, ci sono grandi similitudini con la religione cattolica. Nei racconti popolari e nel folklore i Jinn si distinguono in diverse categorie, alcune delle quali più pericolose di altre. I Marid, molto potenti, spesso associati al mare, sono i classici geni della lampada che esaudiscono desideri. I Frit, Jinn di fuoco, molto forti e talvolta maligni, possono vivere in rovine e luoghi desolati. Shaitan, spiriti malvagi o demoniaci simili ai diavoli nel cristianesimo. Ghoul, mangiano carne umana, abitano i cimiteri, noti anche come Ghoul. Sila e Silat, Jinn femminili associati alla seduzione e all'inganno. Possono mutare forma, diventando animali, persone o oggetti. Vivono in luoghi abbandonati, deserti, foreste, bagni, crocicchi. Alcuni possono possedere gli esseri umani, un concetto che è presente quindi anche nell'esorcismo islamico. Hanno una società, famiglie e persino religioni diverse. Nel mondo islamico ci sono pratiche spirituali per proteggersi dai Jinn malvagi. Recitare versetti del Corano, soprattutto la Sura al-Falaq e An-Nas. Pronunciare Bismillah prima di entrare in casa, che significa nel nome di Allah, è una formula che i musulmani pronunciano spesso prima di iniziare qualsiasi azione importante come mangiare, studiare o viaggiare, per invocare la benedizione divina. Amuleti come i versetti scritti vengono usati da alcuni musulmani anche se non sono approvati universalmente. Aladino e il genio della lampada sono ispirati ai Jinn in forma addolcita. Film come Jinn del 2013, Wishmaster o serie come Supernatural o American Gods li reinterpretano in chiave horror o fantasy. In alcuni racconti moderni i Jinn sono paragonati ad extraterrestri o esseri interdimensionali, per la loro natura non visibile e poteri superiori. Ma se sono qua sulla Terra da milioni di anni, chissà come vengono chiamati nelle altre culture. Noi non lo sappiamo, ma magari un giorno faremo un episodio sulle culture più antiche.
Yeah, I think you were involved with NEDS, there was the ORSAP project, there was the BAS project. In each case, the wonderful research that was happening there was frustrated by budgetary concerns, or in the ORSAP case, there was obviously some kind of big gag that came down from on high where you couldn't get special access program status, and it effectively hindered further ability to take the research any further. Somebody doesn't want, I mean, you describe a UAP control mechanism, if you like, whatever the phenomenon is, it's trying to control us. Isn't there at the same time also a human control mechanism that the powers, the governments of the world, notably the United States, I think to some degree, France even, the United Kingdom, Russia, China, there seems to be some collusion to shut down public interest and study of this issue. And I'm just intrigued as to why. Why is there that control mechanism there? What's going on? Why do they not want us to ask these questions?
So, that's, what you're presenting is correct. That's the way it presents. In science, there are many times when you think that nature is against you. That just as you're going to discover something, looking at Mars, some clouds come between you and, between Mars and the telescope or something. And it looks like there is something that wants, I blame myself first, that I'm just not smart enough to find, because nobody has come knocking on my door. Admittedly, I haven't violated any rules or any laws, and I won't. But I'm not a whistleblower in that case. But the fact is that usually when I attack a problem and I fail, usually it's because I made a mistake somewhere, and I have to go back, get advice, get somebody smarter than me or better informed, or someone. I'm infringing on a discipline that I thought I knew, and I don't really know it as well as I thought. So I need advice and so on. That's what I do. Networking like this is, the key to Silicon Valley. So I've learned to do that. I think that there is a control mechanism outside, and in a way, it makes sense. That the whole question of disclosure. What is it that we're going to disclose? We're going to disclose that there is a phenomena. Well, I can introduce you to some farmers in Kansas who have known that for 20 years. And they've seen more things than all the pilots in the Navy, okay? And they know that, and they talk to each other, and they talk to each other, they talk to the insurance companies, if something happens to the cattle and so on. All those things are going on. We should stay out of Washington and look at the rest of the country. Okay? So the question for me is, how can I build something not so much in the classical physics? There are people who do that very well, and there is a tradition of that. But there is something called information physics. Information and energy. We get taught in school that those are two sides of the same coin, that information changes into energy and energy changes into information in nature, let alone in the lab. Okay. Nobody has really formally started teaching the physics of information. The physics of information, comes right out of course, computer science. And there are many people who use their computer and they think they are computer scientists because they can run a program, but that's not the point. Okay? The point is you have an information machine. What we built with Mr. Bigelow was a very large information machine that was going to start giving us some answers once we refined it. And we were cut off at that point, okay? I think that what we did, it's true what you say, that we were limited within BAS. BAS was given some very specific tasks, as was proper, but within NIDS, we didn't have that. And I think NIDS was, thanks to Mr. Bigelow, really deserves the credit as a researcher himself, who has had experiences himself, and he and his family. And we went very far, very, very far with NIDS. In a way, BAS was a retreat from what we had done at NIDS.
There's a reference in your book to the Holy Grail.
But
what was the Holy Grail you were referring to in the book, Jacques, when you're talking about how if the project gets SAP status, there will be a Holy Grail?
It is a fact. Many people, but probably more within the Navy, from my own experience, than the Air Force or the Army, in those that I met, have a religious concern. It may surprise you, given the fact that I've written very little about that, but I tend to share that concern. I think we should take it into account. I respect it profoundly. That has stopped me from publishing certain things.
I want to take you down that path, Jacques, because this is very interesting, and I'm glad you've started talking about that, because you say in your book, there's a quote, "The phenomenon is hurting people. It is manifest and scary." You use the word evil. And what we've called interference, you say, is very real. And then you go on to say, as much as I thought the Collins elite, which is the term that you use for the people inside the Pentagon and the intelligence community who are blocking this, normally of a strong religious belief system, as much as I thought the Collins elite was wrong in its fundamentalist attitude, I wouldn't blame anybody for talking about demonology here. That's a really interesting comment, because I have to admit, I've recently been speaking, sir, to people who've been telling me that when they've had confronting and quite terrifying experiences with the phenomenon, and I'm not in the least bit religious myself, but they've invoked the name of Jesus Christ or Mother Mary and invoked that to try and tell the phenomenon to leave them alone and go away. And in every case, they've said it's left, that it has respected that invocation of the name of Jesus or Mother Mary. Do you think it's possible the Christians are right?
Well, I don't think all Christians adhere to this. I think it's one sort of formal interpretation of the writings. Most Christians I meet, are open to. After all, if that's a question that has gone on for ages. If we stop looking at what the evil side is doing, we're in fact turning the world over to them. I mean, so it would be like saying we're no longer going to investigate murders. I think we should know as much as we can. And I think that's the view, certainly, of many Catholics. We should know as much as we can about the evil side, if we accept that there is an evil side that's active, that's actually impinging on what we think, what we do.
There's a lovely quotation you have in your book where you say, Collins elite members believe that no one should be interested in anything that comes from Satan. I say, you say, if we're about to do battle with Satan, we might as well learn everything we can about his toys. And I like that quote because, I mean, it is a silly argument that because it involves the possibility of demonology, allegedly, we should ignore it. I mean, you're quite right. Even if it's evil, even if it's something malevolent, we should know about it.
So that raises the question of what exactly should we disclose? Because people have taken, have put me on the spot for saying this on another talk show, that we should not disclose without thinking of the consequences of disclosure. And they say, but everybody says we should disclose. Yes, but that's true. But the moment you disclose, you have to answer 100 other questions. And many of those questions are questions about religion, questions about, the basic texts. Certainly, my friends in Israel don't think about UFOs the way, people in France or in America think about that. And I've had, enough contact with people in Saudi Arabia during meetings there and so on, to know that if you believe in the Jinn today, not the legends, the Jinn today, in sophisticated families, in Riyadh, have had experiences with the Jinn. And I was talking to them about how wonderful the, Arab legends were. And they said, Jacques, what Arab legends? We had a Jinn, and, who turned one of our family members into a crazy automaton. And we had to call, a holy man to read the part of the Quran that addresses a Jinn, bypassing the kid, talking to the Jinn inside the kid, saying, look, we have to apologize, but recognize that this is a kid. He didn't know that there could be a Jinn there. He impinged on your space. He didn't know, but you should please go somewhere else. Now, this is not talking to God. This is talking to the Jinn. Okay? This is today Saudi Arabia. Okay? Sophisticated family has sent one of their sons to Stanford. So this is real. I mean, we're not just saying, look, UFOs are real, the aliens are here. That's a beginning of a lot of problems. And I'm not saying we should have answers to that. We don't have answers, but we should have a structure within which people can express their concerns, their terror, their own experiences, and where we can discuss it.
There's another good reason cited in your book for why we should be cautious about what we wish for when we talk about disclosure. And that's, it's interesting because there are polar arguments in ufology. There's one group in ufology who argue that whatever the phenomenon is, it's loving, it's kind, it's benevolent, and it bears no threat at all to humans, and that we should forget this threat narrative. And they have a go at Lue Elizondo all the time for talking about threat. And it's interesting because at the other side of the pole, there are incidents that you've spent a lot of time looking at, that the Brazilian Air Force looked at in the Colares incident and the quite shocking Chubba Chubba attacks on Brazilian people during the 1970s and the 1980s. Yes. There is no doubt at all, is there, Jacques, that the phenomenon, whatever it is, has, on occasion, killed people, murdered people.
So I wouldn't say that.
Interesting. That's interesting.
What I said, and I know there's somebody has taken my words out of context, as often happens. What has happened, and we've known that for a long time, and that's something that Ned's looked at, that Bass has looked at. Certainly in the medical files, we have instances of people losing their life as a consequence of being close to a UFO or being exposed to the light of a UFO. And those are documented medically, some of them are medically well documented. And I've participated in some of that research. Obviously, I mean, it's something that we should be interested in.
So that's, if you like, incidental damage. It may be that these people have just unfortunately come into close proximity to UAP, whatever the phenomenon is. And
yes,
that has...
but if a 6-year-old kid runs after a ball in front of a Mack truck, that girl is going to be killed. And
Sure.
there is nothing we can do about it. And there is nothing the driver of the Mack truck can do about it. Some of those clearly accidents, okay?
Yeah.
There is radiation. There is radiation we don't understand.
I mean, there are distressing cases, though, and I've seen the photographs from the Brazilian Air Force where they show people who have been mutilated. Dead bodies with holes cut into them, parts of flesh cut away. I mean, that does look like a deliberate injury. And more importantly, in the Colares incidents, there are descriptions of people being hit with what appear to be directed beams of energy.
Yes.
Can we exclude the possibility that that is intentional? Are you suggesting that that's incidental damage?
So I asked that question. Remember, there have been expeditions since, more recently and so on. But I was there when the men who had in command, invited us to the military center that controls one quarter of the Amazonian descent. He speaks the dialects of the Amazon and he understands the territory. I also spoke to 3 of his officers separately after the discussion at the military center. We went to a private house where they wanted to show me more about what they had experienced and what people they had interviewed. We can't do that anymore because they're dead or they are scattered somewhere else. The leader of the task force died about 10 years ago. And he was the one who spent the most time and the reason he invited me and our group, which included Brazilians and Americans who had worked in Brazil, was that he wanted to know what was going on in France. He didn't exactly believe what he was told by his American contacts, and he wanted to combine it with what people knew in Europe. And he knew that I had done research there. So, furthermore, Brazil has a common border with France, which many people don't realize until they look at the map. Okay, so that's a lot of funny things like that culturally that are just delightful. I published the picture, that I recovered there of a woman who had been hit. Now, she had been hit, but what's interesting to the physicist is that she was pinned to her hammock. When you go there, you learn very quickly you don't want to sleep in a bed for a lot of reasons. And so she was close to a window. There is no glass in the window because you want as much air to circulate as possible. It's very warm, it's very wet, and so on. So she was in the hammock, a beam, a collimated beam, came through the window from that object and hit her in the shoulder and pinned her mechanically down to the hammock. Okay, this is not just a beam. I've spoken to physicists who said, well, you could generate with force, collimated within the beam and so on. I don't know what they're talking about. I just don't know. Maybe they're right. It would be, an interesting weapon, but it didn't kill her. I mean, there's a photo. My photograph is of a doctor, looking at this and attending to her. I was there 10 years later. She was fine. I mean, she had recovered from that.